All right, welcome back to Mass Automotive Channel. In this video, we're going to be addressing the brake problem with this car. I'm pretty certain, pretty convinced that it's going to be the master cylinder. The symptom that we have with this brake system is you apply a force to the brake, and just with that constant force, it will eventually work, the pedal will work all its way down to the floor. And by the time it's down to the floor, you only have about 5% braking. It does not brake well at all. There's no way you can lock the wheels up, and it's actually very dangerous to drive the way that it currently is. So in this video, I'm going to go ahead and replace the master cylinder. It looks like the original one that's in there, and I'm sure it's just shot. And then we'll take some measurements, compare the two cylinders, the new one that I just bought and the old one, and then bench bleed the new one, put it in, and then hopefully that takes care of our brake problem. So anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Let's just push on the brake pedal, see if anything comes up. Oh yeah. Okay, before pulling the master cylinder off, I did take a turkey baster and suck as much fluid out of the reservoir as possible. And then I use this little bleeder bottle here to get more fluid out. All right, have the master cylinder off now. I didn't video it coming off, but it's extremely simple. It's basically just these two brake lines here that you take off, and then two nuts off the brake booster here, and then the assembly comes off. And then of course at the wheel, I just opened up that bleeder screw and then pushed on the pedal to get as much fluid out of the system as possible. Okay, once you have the old one out, the next thing that you want to do is get your plunge gauge out on your caliper, and then you want to measure the bores for each of these and make sure that they're the same. If not, you're probably going to have to make an adjustment. I'm not going to go into any great detail about this. There's a wealth of information already out there on the internet. But if you do need to make an adjustment, right here is where you would make it. This here is on the brake booster, and you can see that there's a little knurling here, and then this little screw here, you can move in or out so you get the proper depth for the plunger on the master cylinder. Again, I'm not going to go into detail about this, but just to make you aware that this is very important. If it's too far out, your brakes will be engaged all the time. If it's too far in, you're going to have too much slop. Okay, the next important thing to do is to bench bleed your master cylinder. As you can see, I already got my tube fittings here on the side. I'm going to cut this tubing here and then loop it so it goes back into the reservoir here. And then once I have that set up, I'll add some brake fluid and then use a screwdriver and push this plunger all the way in and out until I bleed all the air out. Again, I'm not going to go into any detail here. There's a lot of information on the internet already regarding this step. Okay, I just used a couple of zip ties to secure the tubing to the reservoir. Okay, we're ready to bench bleed this, and I know some of you may be asking, well, why do you bench bleed it? Why don't you just put it in the car and then bleed it? And I think a good reason not to do it on the car is the fact that when it's in the car, you're relying on the brake booster piston to push this cylinder in all the way, and it may not. If your brake pedal bottoms out on the floor of the car before this piston is pushed all the way in, you're not going to be able to get full travel on this, and you may not be able to bleed all the air out. Whereas here, we're going to take this rod here and we're going to push in on it, and we'll be able to feel it actually bottom completely out. So we know that we've purged all the air out. Again, I'm not sure you could do that on a car. Maybe under ideal circumstances, it may work, but this is for sure going to work. So anyway, that's why we're bench bleeding it. Okay, so in order to do this, I went ahead and put a couple of zip ties around here. That way I can direct these hoses back up through here and into the reservoir, and the zip ties will hold it in place so they don't pop out. So I've got it set up like that, and now we can just go ahead and pour in some of our brake fluid. This particular system calls for .3, so that's what I'm going to use. Okay, let's go ahead and pour some of this fluid in here. Okay, now that we have the reservoir topped off, let's go ahead and compress this piston, and hopefully you'll see the air and fluid come out of these and then back into the reservoir. Okay, and we're just gonna repeat this procedure here until no more air is coming out. And see here, I can actually feel the piston bottom out completely. Okay, now I'm not seeing any air at all. There we are, we're fully bled now. All right, I just went ahead and took the tubes off and then put these plugs in that came with the brake booster. So that'll hold the fluid in until we get it back into the car. Right, let's go ahead and put the master cylinder back in. I'm going to leave this a little bit loose right now so I can just maneuver this around to get these threads started, and we'll do this quickly as possible. We want to minimize the amount of brake fluid that's spilled. It's very corrosive to paint, so if you have any paint in here that you want to protect, definitely put some towels down or something to capture that fluid first. Okay, so let's hurry this up and minimize the amount of time that we have this thing open because fluid will begin to leak. Okay, so get this plug out quickly as possible. Get this in. There we are, nice and snug. Now we can tighten up these bolts. Okay, now let's just tighten these down. So now we have the new master cylinder in here, so now we just need to bleed the brakes in the conventional fashion. The system I'm using, I find it the quickest and fastest, most effective way is a power bleeder. So basically you have a cap that airtight fits onto the master cylinder reservoir, and then this container has some brake fluid and it's pressurized, so it just fills the reservoir as the brake fluid moves through the system, and I pressurize it between 10-15 psi. This way, with the system pressurized, there's no need to pump the brakes. All you need to do is go over to your caliper, set up your bleeder system here, and then just crack it open. And then the pressure from that tank will just start pushing the fluid through the system. And a very fast, quick, and effective way to bleed the brakes. Looks like these calipers have been on here for some time. They're pretty well rusted. However, all the brake lines here look to be pretty new, but looks like everyone installed them probably didn't bleed the system. As you can tell, that brake fluid, it should be clear, and that's very dark, and every once in a while I'll see a little bit of rust and debris come through the system here, so it's pretty darn dirty. It's a good thing we're bleeding the system now. All right, now we have the brake system fully bled, so let's go ahead and get the wheels back on it and take it for a test drive and see how the brakes work. All right, just took it for a test drive and the brakes work. And boy, I'm sure glad we bled the system. This is the brake fluid that came out. That should be a clear fluid. That's pretty nasty. All right, so I guess we'll call it quits for this video. The next problem that this car has is an exhaust leak. So we'll go ahead and take a look and investigate that on the next one. I'll catch you then. Bye-bye.